Hello, you're listening to the IoT Weekly Podcast. Hello, and welcome to episode number 23 of the IoT Weekly Podcast, brought to you by Gearforge Software. This is our weekly look at the landscape of IoT with news, articles, and interviews. My name is Matthew, and I'm joined by my co-host and good friend, Cliff. How you doing today, Cliff?
You know, Matthew, it couldn't be a better day today. May the 4th be with you.
May the 4th be with you.
Thank you.
We're talking this morning. We're not 100% sure what the correct response to May the 4th be with you is, but from church, it always makes me think, and also with you. But
Correct.
I'm not sure if that's formally correct. So.
Yeah, I don't know what the formal response is for May the 4th be with you.
Anyway, it's fun. We're both wearing our Star Wars shirts today and celebrating the best holiday of the year.
Yes, we are.
May 4th. All right. Well, other than Star Wars, Mr. Cliff, what else are you excited about?
Well, you know this already, but pretty excited about it. I'm celebrating my first grandchild. I'm now a papa. My wife is Nana. She's very specific about the names.
She is very specific about it.
Very specific.
There's a branding effort going on.
And she was picking out names with the other grandparents, like who's got dibs on Nana and Papa already. So
that's funny.
Yeah, so I've got to toe the line when it comes to these names here, but super excited. Beautiful little boy, 8 pounds, 14 ounces, 20 inches long, and just couldn't be more excited.
Yes, and congratulations all around. That's terrific news.
Thank you. How about you, Matthew? What are you doing, and what are you up to?
What am I excited about? I am excited about, well, we went to, as you know, you well know, we were at IoT Fuse Conference the last few days. I was excited to pick up a free particle photon.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, it's just, it's just fun. We got an awesome, we got a fantastic ruler from DigiKey.
I've got it sitting right here next to me, and some of the stuff I don't quite understand what they're talking about. So.
It's amazing. It's really cool. And then I was also excited to stop by the particle booth and get a free photon. I think that'll be fun. So probably connect something to the internet.
Exactly.
I don't know what that'll be yet. So yeah, so that's good times. Cliff, do we have any feedback this week?
We did not get any feedback this week, Matthew.
Well, I think we actually did, technically, but not through the official channels.
That's totally correct. So we'll touch on that. I think we've got a small section just here shortly about the IoT Fuse Conference, Matthew. We can touch on that there. But if you do have feedback that you'd like to throw at us or a soup recipe for Mr. Matthew,
yes,
you can reach us at podcast@gearforgesoftware.com. Or take a look. We're on Twitter at Gearforge IoT.
That's right. We would love to hear from you. Cliff and I spent quite a bit of our time yesterday at the booth at IoT Fuse, really just talking about the podcast, because we see this as a community building effort. The best way to be able to reach people is through the medium of podcasting, and we'd like this to be a two-way conversation. So we'd love to hear from you if you're interested in any of the news we talk about, if you have a topic you'd like to bring up, or if you're interested in or know somebody who might be interested in maybe doing an interview or a guest spot on the show. We would love to hear from you. So please get in touch.
Most definitely. And we got some potential opportunities coming up for some new interviews. Really cool stuff that's happening in the IoT space.
Absolutely. All right. And now a word from our sponsor.
That's right. So our sponsor's different this week. Gearforge Software is an IoT consulting firm that works with mid-sized companies that are ready to dip their toes into the connected world. If you don't know where to turn when figuring out your IoT strategy, why don't you give Gearforge Software a call and just have a discussion. You can learn more at https://gearforgesoftware.com.
Fantastic. And we've mentioned it a couple of times, but I think, one of the highlights of the week for us has been the IoT Fuse Conference. And we were there. We've mentioned this a few times on the podcast, we had a workshop on Wednesday morning, practical machine learning. You don't have to be a data scientist. That might not be the exact title, but it's close to that.
It was pretty close, and it was
Yeah.
early.
It was really early. So I actually spent the days leading up to that getting up early, like very early in the
That is the
morning.
funniest thing I've ever heard. It's like
Well, I needed to,
I'm
yeah, it was
gonna
like
prep
training.
way up
Yeah, I
early.
needed to condition myself. I think I was
Oh,
fully awake.
you were
So,
spot on. You did awesome. It was
so did
so
you,
good.
Mr. Cliff.
Yes. Well,
Yes.
and I just want to say thank you for all the folks that came to our session. I know we had a couple snafus with network and a couple other things, but very grateful for those that came out and learned something at the session. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Really appreciate it, everybody who was at the session. And also a thank you to Patrick and the team who put IoT Fuse together. I think you ran a great conference, and we appreciate the sponsorship. So thank you, and good work.
And in case our friend that we know at the conference happens to be working out right now and listening to the podcast, we'll give you a shout out also.
Yes, yeah, thanks for stopping by the booth.
We appreciate it.
Well, is it news time?
Bump, 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 news time. I would say so.
All right. So what's going on in IoT and the sea?
IoT in the sea. Well, we had talked about this before. Gosh, there's quite a few articles back, but do you remember, Matthew, when we were talking about how the Navy wanted to create an ocean of IoT or an ocean of things? Do you remember that article?
Yeah, I thought it was creepy.
I did too, but apparently they're moving forward with this. This article we have here, it talks about how the Internet of Things role on battlefields and at sea, and the Army or Navy are still mapping out how to bring more Internet of Things devices into combat domains. They've actually, if you dive into the article a little bit here, they actually have RFPs out to actually start looking through this. So they're serious, Matthew.
I'm sorry, RFP?
Oh, sorry, request for proposals. So they've sent out requests
I
looking for
see.
folks to assist the government with actually creating these interesting things. So I mean, like DARPA for the Ocean of Things is leading that portion, and it's two problems that DARPA is hoping that the industry can help them overcome. Number one, as you can think about it, the ocean is a fairly harsh environment. So they need some sort of floating craft that can survive at least a year in the middle of nowhere and protect the IoT sensors inside. So
Okay.
they're thinking it would get scuttled or destroyed basically after a year. Then the other challenge is the data collection network. So it needs to send the data to satellites and then store it in the cloud and reassemble to show a nearly real-time status report of the entire ocean.
What are they looking for here?
I, I, I'm sure they're just looking for fish floating by, Matthew. What do you think?
It's probably whales, I'm guessing.
Yeah, some whale watching, things like that. Or maybe they'd
Def
like to know every single ship in the entire ocean.
yes, definitely not Russian submarines. That is
No,
definitely not what they're looking for.
no. Or just, cargo ships and things of that sort. I'm certain they probably want to know everything.
I'm
Or
guessing,
just schools of mackerel.
yeah. Yeah, right. But yeah, I'm just curious, like what is I mean, I understand, I guess. I just wonder I don't know enough about sort of some of the defense capabilities, but what is the advantage of this oceans of things conceptually over current technology?
Sure. I don't know that. I'm sure there's probably uncharted areas of the ocean. They'd love to be able to get information about it, right? That's what I'm guessing.
Hmm.
So it's in typical fashion. You probably want to have the more advanced warning that you can get of such sorts is always better. So
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
uh,
just curious
three
what kind
days
of
is always better than 2 hours.
yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, I just wonder. Again, I don't know anything about the subject. And unfortunately our listeners probably can't help because if you know something, you probably can't tell us on the air. So,
Exactly. In most cases, yeah. The Army, though, from their standpoint, they see IoT devices taking a passive role in future battlefields, is what they've actually put in here. They're really
well,
curious about gathering intelligence on the enemy and then performing tasks and even possibly directing some of the fighting through a human direction.
We remember we reported on some of those technologies that were going to be useful to, I think, probably more Army than Navy, right? But
Yep,
with flexible tech that maybe could get
exactly.
built directly into a uniform or
Mhm.
something, right?
Yep. Yes. Yeah. I think it's definitely coming in, and I'm not. We're not surprised. I think every couple of weeks we see something new coming out. So there's definitely investment, and so the Army Research Lab, they've got about 25 million being spent on it, and we understand from a contract that's actually not a lot of money. I know that sounds odd, but that's not a ton of money when it comes to government contracts, actually.
No, it sounds cheap.
It is. It is. That's fairly small budget for IoT research at this point. So I'm sure it's more of an R&D and some of that sort.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to watch how that develops. And,
Yep.
so is this something like, again, I'm not 100% sure how this works, but there's sort of like United States territorial waters, right? Where
Sure.
basically the United States claims you're basically in our space if you're in
Mhm.
there. But then there are waters that are not essentially not claimed by anybody. International waters, I believe they're
Yep.
called. And I wonder how where do these sensors go? How do other countries feel about that? And, how does that stuff get sorted out? I don't know the answer to that now.
I don't even know if they know the answer to that, Matthew, but it might be like a first mover type scenario.
Yeah, I wonder. I just wonder. I mean, I'm sure this comes up now, just not
Oh,
with
of course.
IoT, right? You deploy something somewhere, and does it belong there or not, and who decides? I don't know.
Yep.
Interesting.
Like my IoT device is bigger than yours.
Yeah.
And mine has a bomb attached to it.
It's a sensor.
Yes. It's a sensor. Air quotes.
That's exactly. Don't worry about that.
Oh,
Don't
no.
worry about the red light.
Nope. So we'll keep coming back around to this, and the ocean of things. We thought it was kind of funny before, but now it looks like it's solidifying. So we'll keep
Yeah,
coming
it's,
back.
it's like a real thing.
It is. It is.
Uh,
And then Matthew, it sounds like Google might be getting into the IoT world, hardware.
well, obviously they've been pushing in that direction, but recently this article is from May 3rd, and written by Jon Gold, by the way. It comes from networkworld.com, but they were reporting on the Google's announcement of Android Things 1.0. And so this is sort of the next logical step. So basically, this is Android tuned for embedded devices, designed for IoT, and it's the Android operating system, right?
Sure, that makes sense.
It's being billed as sort of a unified one-size-fits-all software option. And targeted at things like smart displays or digital signage or kiosks, that kind of thing, right? Which is
Boy,
actually a great fit for Android.
especially if they're going to run some ads, maybe from Google.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there's some interesting things here that I kind of pulled out of the article, but device makers. So one of the big problems with Android right now, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of others, is that it because of its nature, it is the OEMs can modify Android to suit their needs, and that is
Yep.
both good and bad. It's
Yes.
good because it makes it a perfect sort of launching pad for these new products, but it's bad in that fragmentation of that OS is a big problem. And you can have, so now all of a sudden, and we know this from experience
Yes, we do.
in our careers in mobile application development and deploying across basically an SDK across, oh, God knows how many devices, so many devices.
The fragmentation is just awful.
It was really hard on the Android side because you would come up against a particular device. The manufacturer had changed something. They'd swapped out something. There was like the browser, who knows, right? And all of a sudden you wind up with something doesn't work quite right. And Google has said that they are not going to allow device makers to change some parts of this Android Things code. In particular, they have included, I should probably back up just a step, which is to say that, so they have, the auto update capabilities of Android are included in this Android Things
Hmm.
operating system, and which is a fantastic feature.
Yep.
But basically, they're saying the device makers cannot change that. They can't pull that out or whatever, which means that you could flash an update at any time, right? To fix those bugs and security issues, which is basically a huge thing that's missing in IoT right now. In general, and we talk about this all the time, is that device manufacturers are sort of reluctant to update their devices, or maybe it's just simply not practical because of how do you deploy it? You know, you have to kind of plan for that ahead of time, and everything's got to work just right. So it looks like they're leveraging that, and it'll be interesting to see if that addresses part of the whole update problem, right?
Does it say in here whether it's going to be like you can manage the rolling updates or not, or anything like that,
It,
or?
I didn't go into that level of detail in the article,
Okay.
and I didn't dig any deeper, but that I have lots of questions about this,
Oh, so do I.
honestly, just from a practical standpoint.
Yep. Yeah, I love the idea that you can roll that out, but it's like when my iPhone updates on its own, there's many a times where things just don't work quite right, and I got to reconnect my Bluetooth and some of these others. So I'm glad they're just focusing on kiosks and things like that right now, because I think there's going to be some stuff that needs sorted out realistically on this one.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you do an update, it's hard. I mean, Apple they have a relatively homogeneous system, right?
Yep,
They have a
they do.
relatively small number of devices that the operating system potentially runs on,
Hmm.
and yet it's still they run into issues with almost every release. There's something, you know, whether or
Every
not you've
time.
experienced it on your device or not, you know, may vary, but somebody does. And even in that area, it's hard, you know, even when they kind of control and there's relatively small amount of hardware. I could see this being very difficult to manage, but in spirit, the idea here is right,
Yes.
and I'll be interested in seeing how it goes, I guess.
Yeah. Does it say anything about being able to get these yet? Because I'd love to get my hands on one of these just to play with it.
So I think I don't know the answer to that. I don't. They are announcing it. They just announced it, right? May
Okay.
3rd. And um, let's see. I don't know. I don't have dates
Okay.
right now.
Nope. I was just kind of curious. I always like to know if there might be an opportunity to get a hold of one of these things, or for those of our friends that work at Google, if you can get a hold of one of these and play with it and give us a heads up of what it's like, we'd love to get your feedback on it too.
Yeah, it looks like the preview release of the OS was last month. So this was the announcement of 1.0, but it does not mention anything related to anything related to
Sure.
hardware.
Okay.
Because I don't see anything in the article that says there's hardware happening. This is just the OS, as from what I
Interesting.
see. Yeah.
So whatever. So I'm certain they're working with the hardware vendors to get this out there then.
Well, I think, yeah, probably as a hardware vendor, if I'm going to ship a kiosk, all of a sudden this becomes a meaningful
Hmm.
operating system option.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what this can lay over. So interesting.
Yeah,
Well, we
yeah,
will
pretty
keep you
cool.
up to date as this comes out. And like I said,
Yeah,
if our friends, if you know something, please let us know.
I'll be really curious to see. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Cliff, what's up next? Industrial IoT.
Yeah. So I love industrial IoT. Main reason for that is that's one of the biggest spaces for practical IoT today. And I found an article. It's more of a do's and don'ts, and I really felt this might resonate just based off some of the consulting work we've done, Matthew.
Yeah.
And if you take a look at the article itself, it's like, hey, it starts out with, hey, your boss wants to start an IoT project. What's next, right? And in here, it quotes Andy Rhodes. He's the former vice president and general manager for Dell's Internet of Things commercial sales division. And it quotes in here is that Andy had once said that he no longer takes phone calls from companies asking for some IoT. What he's saying is if the company doesn't know what it wants to do with connected devices, they're not ready for a sales talk.
Hmm.
So yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's super interesting.
Um, yeah. So what the article goes into is it says, hey, there's two ways to potentially go about this specifically from an industrial standpoint. The first path is to start small with a project that can offer a short-term ROI, or return on investment. So it's like, hey, in a factory, they're saying it could mean installing cameras or sensors on a manufacturing line to replace human spot checkers. So you pull those out, you get some ROI, you can validate what you're trying to do, right?
Okay. Yep. Makes
The
sense.
other option, what do you think the other option is, Matthew?
I don't know. Why don't you tell me?
Okay. Other option is go big, right? Go big or
Okay.
go home.
All
So
in.
it's like all
Yeah.
in. Yep. Whole big scenario. So it's like, hey, build a platform or product that can change your entire business model, because that's possible these days. So, and it's in the, for an example, it says in 2015, Emerson Climate Technologies launched a new connected product in the HVAC. With $100 worth of sensors per home, the HVAC installer in Emerson could guarantee a period of time that the heating or cooling system will operate before needing repairs. So, and what they're saying is like the ROI is still, though, unclear for that particular projects.
See, this is really interesting. 'Cause remember, we got a new furnace. We talked
Yeah,
about this in the
we
podcast.
did.
And I was impressed that with the new furnace, it came with some air pressure sensors.
Yep.
So it could basically modify the fan, the blower based on the air pressure. So if it, for example, we had very constricted kind of duct work, it could blow harder, essentially, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
To make sure that we got enough circulation of air into the strange corners of the house. And if you didn't need that, it could sort of ramp down, thereby using less energy and saving me money, which I
Yeah.
always like. So I just thought that was it was just a great example of smart sort of. It's not IoT, it's not actually connected to anything, but it's sort of a smart use of a sensor
Mm-hmm.
in this equipment to make it a little more intelligent,
And do
right?
you pay a
Smarter device.
monthly fee or anything for that, Matthew?
I don't know. No, it's
Really? It just comes with it.
just part of the hardware. Yeah,
Huh.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting.
That's really intriguing. Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting. The article is really talking about kind of two different paths, and but they're saying is like, hey, this isn't your normal scenario, because there's so many different factors involved, and we've talked about it. It's such, when we were at the conference, we had quite a few conversations with folk that it's, well, Microsoft, for example, they were there and we're talking to them. It's such a multidisciplinary type endeavor in many cases.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
So.
Definitely.
Yeah, really interesting article. It comes from the IEEE Spectrum, so it's a trusted source, and just really interesting from that standpoint.
So I really worry a little bit about the go big or go home
Oh
scenario,
gosh. Oh yeah.
because I've seen so many cases where, I mean, it's like it just goes against my instincts, I guess, with sort of agile, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
Where there's so many steps of actually validating ahead of time. Yeah, I always worry about that a little bit.
I do too. I personally, I'd rather say, how do we go about with steps to get you there, so you can validate your revenue model.
Small, disciplined, incremental improvements.
100%.
But there is something to say that not, there are probably some efforts that require a big leap.
Yep.
For example, the Internet of the Ocean or
The
whatever.
ocean of things.
Ocean
That's a
of
pretty
things,
big.
yes.
That's a
That
big
one.
leap. And it's probably okay that DARPA's doing that, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a big leap.
They've got a big piggy bank.
Yeah, they do. Oh man.
So Matthew,
Yes.
was Microsoft been up to something again?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about Azure Sphere
What's that?
today. Well, so this article by Mary Jo Foley goes back a couple of weeks, but Microsoft announced Azure Sphere, which is basically I'm going to call it sort of a security play, but it's definitely an IoT play. The idea is securing edge devices, a new operating system and microcontroller service. So apparently they're going to have certified microcontrollers, Azure Sphere certified, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also they have the Azure Sphere OS operating system for the microcontrollers. They have an Azure Sphere security service. And their pitch here is that, even the most price sensitive devices should be designed in such a way that they achieve high levels of device security, because it is critical to society's safety, basically.
Huh.
And so this is kind of an interesting, it's like they are responding to the number one critique in the IoT space, which is security. And Microsoft officials have said this, it's silicon, right? So this is not just software, but it's actually baked in the chip, but it includes learnings from Xbox regarding how to secure these microcontrollers and devices that they power. This is interesting because we actually talked to somebody from Microsoft yesterday
Yeah.
at the conference who said exactly this. He's like, well, I mean, we learned this from Xbox, basically. We
Yep.
learned how to kind of lock that down and make it harder for hackers. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're applying the same principle now to this. It's
Mm-hmm.
interesting. And so the first Azure Sphere chip will be the MediaTek MT3620. The new security subsystem is called Pluton, which I just like the name of that.
Yeah.
And the Azure Sphere OS, so this was kind of big news a few weeks ago, although for a silly reason, but it includes a custom Linux kernel and secured application containers.
Boy, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, and so this is the first time that Microsoft has distributed a custom Linux kernel. And so that was big news, which it is, first time in 42 years or whatever that they've distributed a custom Linux kernel. But also by today's standards, I kind of feel like I'm so surprised it hasn't already happened,
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. But again, I talk about this a lot. It feels like Microsoft has become a different kind of company. They're looking at things differently. And Linux is a big part of their strategy now. And so it makes perfect sense that this is what they're doing. By the way, this will be a separate article at a different time, but they also have a Windows IoT play, and they're continuing to move that forward. But this specific to Azure Sphere, it looks like it's using a custom Linux kernel. So Azure Sphere Security Service is authentication, threat response, and failure response. So again, I think trying to sort of tie up some of those security loose ends.
Mm-hmm.
And a quote here from the article is that developers can use Visual Studio tools for Azure Sphere to write applications, that can connect their Azure Sphere devices to Azure to get telemetry data, messaging, and access to Azure IoT Hub and other services. So
That'd be cool.
well, yeah, I would think this would be, I think this would be pretty great for the people, those developers who are out there who are used to the Microsoft tooling, they're
Yep.
used to using Visual Studio, and all of this just integrates and kind of opens that up for them.
That would be
So,
great.
yeah, and coming from a background where both of us have spent quite a bit of time in .NET environments,
Yep.
we can understand that.
And it sounds like there might be some dev kits coming up here.
Yeah, so private preview was April 16th, and dev kits they're planning by mid-year, and they're planning to have products on the shelf from manufacturers by the end of 2018 that use this whole thing.
Yeah, they must have forgotten us, Matthew. I didn't see one come in the mail to us.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll have to correct to that.
We will. We'll have to talk to our IoT guy and see if we can't get one of these things.
Well, and I think this is interesting. Microsoft, as I've said it before, but this is one of their big focus areas. They're spending billions of dollars in IoT, but everybody is. Google, Amazon, and Microsoft all have an IoT play right now, along with lots and lots of other people, right? And it's just very interesting to see how this is evolving, and it'll be interesting to see what wins, basically, right? Is there going to be, like, at some point things have to consolidate a little bit, right?
I would think so. And we're seeing that now, but I mean, they're still writing the standards, for God's sakes, on how all this is going to work.
Yeah, well, you think about how mobile evolved. So there was one leader right out of the gates,
Yep.
and that was Apple. They were just there first, and they sort of set the standard, and then Android kind of caught up. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And Microsoft is never able to catch up. They had no play, right? This is different because now I don't know who's ahead.
I don't
There
know
was
who.
nobody
I
who
don't think
was
there's
right out the
anybody
gate.
ahead.
No,
Yeah.
no, I don't know. I mean, it's a battle, and all three big platforms are involved, and it'll be interesting to see. I can't wait
And
to kind of watch this unfold.
here's the funny thing: there's no Apple yet.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I mean, every week we report on a bug in Apple's home IoT stuff, so I don't know.
Yeah, I just don't hear any big plays from a industrial or business to business standpoint. Maybe the home side, but
Yeah,
not really platform, right, for
that
developers.
might be worth a little bit of research, and maybe on the future episode see what people are saying about Apple's IoT strategy, because you're right. I haven't heard anything from them.
No, I mean,
And
because
maybe they've decided it's not their business, you know?
it
It's
is
not what they do.
possibly taking more of the consumer route.
Yeah, totally. They're a consumer play.
Hmm.
For the most part, that has been their thing, you know? And they're going to keep focus on, the market that they excel at, I guess. It's possible.
Very, very much possible. Well, I'll be looking forward to get our hands on one of these dev kits for both of us, and
Hmm.
I'm really excited to play with it.
Me too. I mean, you and I have talked quite a bit about how impressed we've been at some of the recent offerings from Redmond. So it'll be interesting to see how that continues to evolve and if we continue to be impressed. So.
Yeah, the big thing I'm curious about, Matthew, as far as the evolution is more of the edge computing,
Hmm.
just more capabilities in that space is what I'm really interested in. Is how do we get it closer to the device but still with low power consumption if possible, and by doing that we could possibly remove. And when I'm thinking edge, it's almost like edge compiled with a network. I
Hmm.
know we've read a little bit about Amazon doing some of that too. So really kind of curious as they head down that direction.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm interested also in how, if these players can sort of, give us a platform that makes it faster and cheaper to get to
Yep.
market,
Oh my
while
gosh.
having, stuff like experts handle the security for you, and,
And not
so
have to
many
go through
things.
FCC certifications,
Amen.
right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's right there. That's another hurdle you got to sort through.
it's all good stuff. So I'll be curious to see how it evolves, and we'll keep our eyes on it and report back.
That we will.
So, folks, if you have any feedback, we've said it before, we'll say it again. Shout out to us. That's awkward. Say hi. Send us an
Shout
email.
out to us. Oh, not weird at all, Matthew.
Nope. No, I speak English as my native language. So, yes, you can send us an email and send that to podcast@gearforgesoftware.com, or you can find us on Twitter, and that is at Gearforge IoT. And we would love to hear from you, as we've said before. Send us anything you want. All right, that just about wraps things up for this week's episode. So, Cliff, what are you planning for this weekend? Anything fun?
Well, I've got a little catch up. We were at the conference for 2 days, so I've got some catch up I got to get here, Matthew. So I've got a workbench I'm going to put together, and I've got some metal fabricating that I've got to do. So that'll be interesting. Me with a fabrication kit.
Fun.
How
That
about
sounds
you?
great. Well, I'm in the same boat you are. I have some catch up to do, which I'm sure I will spend part of my weekend doing. But kind of on the other side, we're planning some sort of maybe home improvement projects. So I've got contractors coming out giving us estimates and all of that fun stuff, and
Mm.
a few things to fix after the long Minnesota winter.
Well, I don't know if you knew about this, but there's a free comic giveaway this Saturday.
What? No, I
Yeah,
didn't.
yeah. So we'll have to touch base, and there's a free comic. There's folks are dressed up and all that good stuff.
Oh, fun. That my son might enjoy that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening, folks. We hope you'll join us again for next week's show. And until then, so long and be well.
Take care, everyone.